Age Tech Innovators.
Hello, and welcome to Age Tech Innovators, the podcast where we explore how technology is transforming the way we care for our aging and vulnerable population. I'm Monty, your host, and each week we chat with inspiring leaders who are making a real difference in the lives of older adults, sharing innovations and ideas that help support and uplift those who need it most. Join us as we work together to build a brighter, more caring future for everyone. Now, let's dive in. So I have the pleasure of chatting to Casey today. Casey, run me through who you are and what you do in 60 seconds.
Sure, love to, Monty. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. This is fun to talk about my favorite subject. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years now, if you can believe it, in this aging technology industry. I was the founder of Telcare Systems, which, interestingly enough, I'm the trademark holder of the term Telcare, which there's also Telcare, which we hear a lot in the UK where you live. But I've been around a long time, and my first company was a personal emergency response company. You know, push a button to get help. And we also had a medication reminder service through a plain old POTS line, which was kind of fun for those of you technologists who know what a plain old telephone service is. I then sold that business to Lifeline in the United States, which Lifeline was the 800-pound gorilla in the personal emergency response industry. I stayed on for many years, and we ended up building that up to about 500,000 subscribers and sold that to Philips in 2006, which was a kind of a seminal event in this whole industry. I then got involved in investing and developing new products and services for the aging technology field in Silicon Valley, which is where I live today. I live in Los Gatos, California, and I've been involved with many companies, Wellcore, Blue Libris. Those two companies built automated fall detection and mobile safety devices, still in use today. In the case of Blue Libris, it has a new brand. It was acquired by Numera Health, which Numera was then acquired by Nortec. So you'll see the pattern as I tell my story that anything I seem to be involved with gets acquired or merged into something else, which makes sense as this age tech industry evolves. I ran Tunstall Americas for 3.5 years, which was the North American arm of Tunstall, which is well known in the UK and Europe. And today I am the CEO of Smart Meter, and I've been doing this for 3.5 years. And we are building an incredible ecosystem of healthcare providers and RPM, remote patient monitoring companies, and chronic care management companies. We are the foundational wholesale infrastructure supplier of the data, the pipe, the devices, everything that enables remote patient monitoring in the United States. So that's what I do today.
What an introduction. I couldn't believe the fact that you've got the trademark for such a well-known phrase. So crazy. I'm really excited for today's chat. Let's rewind 30 years. What inspired you 30 years ago to actually enter this industry?
So there were two things that happened, Monty. And like so many of us in the industry, it was a personal event that happened in our family. And in my case, it was two. One, my grandfather fell and couldn't get help. So that precipitated the search for these types of solutions to help older people when they do fall and need help. And of course, the TV commercial had been running for many years in the United States from Life Alert. So we were aware of this. Well, at the same time, my father, who had started a interesting association called Certified Senior Advisors, which was a very successful association for the professionals that wanted to learn more about how to help people in the aging field, he went to a trade show in Scottsdale, Arizona in early 1994, and he came across a DOS-based computer system sitting at one of the booths, and this DOS-based system would dial out to people's homes and check on them, and if they needed help, they could press 1. If they were okay, they could press 9. So I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. What if we shifted that technology into a medication reminder service and said, hey, if you took your meds, press 1. If you didn't, press 9. So again, very rudimentary early days to help with medication reminders. That was the start. And I did a lot of research on the industry, which meant going to the public library. There was no readily available internet back then to understand what businesses were in the space. Again, I'm going way back here, dating myself, but that was the origin story.
For everyone who's listening, a public library is a place where you have physical books, like a Kindle, but you actually have only one Kindle per book, and you have to go to a building where you go and get the physical books out. So thank you for sharing such intimate information about how you started this or you joined because of your own personal experience. Once you joined the industry and you started innovating, what was it that kept you within this industry for over 30 years?
Oh my gosh. So it started out with non-voice systems. Like, these tabletop devices would plug into the phone line, kind of like an answering machine, and then you'd plug the person's telephone into the back of it. And so you would, if someone needed help, they would press their button, which was through different wireless technologies. Bluetooth wasn't even around yet, by the way. So different types of radio frequency technology. And that signal would go from the person's pendant button to the base unit, and then the signal would be sent through the phone line. Again, very similar to what we have today. Like, the value proposition still remains true 30 years later. Push a button, get help. Now, what's changed in that 30 years? Oh my goodness, right? So the first innovation was two-way voice, to where these desktop units in people's homes had two-way voice built into it, so you could now interact with the person who needed help without them having to get to their telephone. Again, this may sound very clunky, like stagecoach-like, but this is how it worked back then. So the person who needed help could then speak to a care agent at a monitoring center through their box, anywhere inside their home. That was innovation number one. Then the pendants became waterproof. Again, may be shocking that they weren't waterproof up until then, but then the pendants became smaller and waterproof. Huge innovation, actually. Very hard to do back then. It takes technologists in a lab fussing around with materials to make something waterproof, for gosh sakes, right? So that happened. Okay, then it became, I would call, passive monitoring systems started to emerge a little bit. It was way early, and this notion of fall detection. I was literally walking down the hall at Lifeline with our head of engineering, Michael Belomo, in 2001 in Framingham, Massachusetts, and we were talking about fall detection and how to build a fall detector. And there were some things that you'd put on your hip. They were kind of like a garage door opener size thing, and you'd kind of wear that, and if you fell, it had a oh my gosh, it didn't even have a gyroscope in it. It was very old technology, but it would detect if someone had a fall, and then send a signal. And so he stopped me. He said, "What if we put the fall detector in the pendant?" And I mean, what a simple idea, but no one had thought of it until that time. So was he the first one? I don't know. There was probably someone in a garage in Menlo Park or Palo Alto working on it, but anyhow, that was the first I'd heard of it. So that was the innovation, was automatic fall detection inside the pendant. Well, then it turned into mobile safety devices with the next big thing, and the ability to get help anytime, anywhere, with a small, easy-to-use, dedicated device with a single button on it, with two-way voice built in, with fall detection, with motion sensing, with GPS, all these wonderful things we have today. That was in around 2011 is when those came out. And I was part of the team that was involved in building one of the first ones. Well, and then, oh my gosh, since then, it's now migrated towards clinical monitoring, Monty. And now the clinical angle has come in. Now that broadband has improved, the cost of technology has come down, and the ability for humans, the willingness of people to actually use technology has changed dramatically, especially in my 3 decades doing this. Regardless of generation, most people are willing to try technology now, which is a huge, huge part of the equation. So please, that's my view of where technology has been, and I've been involved with lots of it along the way.
Wow. So there's probably few people who've seen in such an in-depth and close way how technology has been progressing over the last 30 years. How do you see, based on all of this historic data that you've seen firsthand and been involved in terms of guiding some of the decisions, how do you see this is going to change over the next 20 years? We all hear the stat about how the population of elderly people is going to double by 2050. What are some of the key innovations that you think will come based on how you're seeing this general trajectory moving to support these people?
It's a great question. And I'm going to start with a story, if I could, and then I'll answer it more from a technology prognosticator standpoint. So I was at an investor conference 2 years ago in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was representing sort of the age tech industry and sort of the device side of the industry in this particular panel, in a room of maybe 300 investors, private equity firms, and venture capitalists, and so on. And someone asked a question. They said, similar to yours, what's going on with innovation? And what have you seen that's interesting? And what do you think will come? And I said, well, listen, there's a lot of stuff out there that is pretty fascinating, but I can tell you innovation is happening and it is continuing at a brisk pace. And I can guarantee right now, I don't know who's doing this or where it's happening, but I absolutely guarantee right now, today, as we sit here in this room in Nashville, Tennessee in 2023, that some entrepreneur is working in a garage on a cane to make a cane more advanced. Now, what does that mean? They're probably going to put in a two-way voice system on it. They'll put a help button on it. They'll have automatic fall detection in the cane. They might have a light on it, a flashlight, so people, when they walk, they can see. They may have gait analysis built into it, an algorithm to track how the cane is, the speed of the cane as it's moving. I guarantee someone's doing this right now today. And they kind of snickered and laughed and so on. 1 year later, okay, I serve on AT&T Healthcare Executive Advisory Council. And I was at an AT&T meeting in Dallas at their headquarters, and the head of their healthcare division stood up in front of the room. He had a cane in his hand. It had every feature that I just described to you, Monty. So, fascinating stuff, right? So, with
1 year.
That was fun.
Only in 1 year. Yeah.
So now, where's it headed? Okay, so that's just, I tell that story because there's innovation happening all over the place. You never know where it's going to come from. I would say where it's headed the next 20 years is that type of embedded technology in everyday life. That's the change. You see it in the smart home that we hear so much about, the Internet of Things we hear so much about, refrigerators tracking people's consumption and motion sensors in the house, fall detectors built in to see if someone needs help or not. All these things for aging in place. Sleep monitoring, huge. I left out part of my story. I was involved with a company called BAM Labs, and this was the company that developed the technology inside of the Sleep Number bed that's called the Sleep Number Smart Bed. And it literally tracks heart rate, respiration, motion, incredible metrics around sleep. You don't have to wear anything. There's no wearable involved. Just go to bed, go to sleep. So, these kinds of things are out there, and it will become more and more common, all right? So I think as they're embedded in the everyday technologies, that's going to be the difference. And your imagination can run wild. Obviously cars are changing radically, very quickly. Transportation is changing dramatically. But that's kind of the patient, subscriber, user experience is transforming. The phone, right, the smartphone, those do amazing things now. We literally are evaluating technologies all the time with my current company, Smart Meter, and some of these things, they do remarkable things. Now, they have to be usable. That's part of the equation. It has to be readily usable by the person, the human. Generationally, right? You talked about 20 years. 20 years from now, everyone will know how to use these kinds of things. Right now, there's still a little bit of a gap in kind of this, in the United States at least, for the 75 plus crowd. Some of it's a little confusing, like an Apple Watch. Everybody talks about the Apple Watch. Well, if I can think of them all, there's like 5 problems with the Apple Watch in the world of aging. Number 1, they can't see it. Number 2, they can't touch it. They can't find the button if they need help, or they can't touch the screen. Number 3, they don't know how to download an app or interface with an app. And number 4, they can't hear it if there's a voice coming out of it. Then number 5, it's too expensive. Like literally 90% of seniors in the United States cannot afford an Apple Watch, right? Now, I tell that story because very cool technology, but all those problems I listed can all be overcome. All that can be overcome over time. Will Apple do it? Who knows? They may not care, right? They have a nice market, they're growing, but that kind of technology, which, people wear a watch, great. You just have to make it usable for the senior. That's just another example. I'll pause there and if you have any thoughts from your perspective on that, I'd be curious.
I love the idea of a more embedded home space. I have heard, so I went for lunch with someone has been in the sector for 40 years a couple of days ago. And his idea was that we may see as voice technology, and it might be that, because right now we're going a bit of a divergent space in terms of sensors. We have a sensor for the fridge, a sensor for the loo, a sensor for the light, a sensor for the cane, a sensor for the shoe. But it might be that we see a divergence of ideas, and then eventually a convergence where we see one bed sensor may be able to get the same amount of actionable insights as 40 other sensors. And it might be that is actually just the preferred state once we actually start to see what we can do with the data and comparing, well, we don't need to have 30 motion sensors around the house when you could have one cane. We don't need to have X when you can have that. So I'm foreseeing an explosion, as we already are seeing, in the number of IoT devices, but then a consolidation when we start to actually get insight from these devices onto maybe a couple of devices that will do the majority of the data collection.
Interesting thesis. I agree. I think that's very spot on, because we've seen that historically as well, where things have converged into, for example, the mobile safety device. 15 years ago, who would have thought you could put all that into a mobile safety device and it's there? Yeah, I agree. And NVIDIA, they've recently announced they're going to go full speed into healthcare next, right? So they'll figure out how to take these high-powered chips and make all this stuff work, right? So that next phase from a technology side. Now, let me bring another angle to this. We're talking about the end user experience. Well, what about the services and the companies and the healthcare systems on the other end of this, right, that have to interpret the data or interact with the patient? Lot of innovation there. And obviously, your company has done amazing things with that. What you're doing to help the call centers be more efficient, incredible. I think the healthcare systems will be adopting new and better tools very quickly to help them parse through data. Right now it's about taking these petabytes of data and making sense of it in a platform, in a user interface that's easy to read. Well, I think that experience is going to change as well for the physicians, the nurses, the clinicians, anyone who's licensed to interpret that data is going to come out very different. And that's where the AI piece comes in and makes it so simple for those physicians to use that powerful tool to provide a better diagnosis, quicker, faster, more people. In the United States, there's a fundamental problem with the number of doctors and the number of nurses. It's not growing. It's not growing fast enough to keep up with the age wave that's here. It's happening that, too many people need help. There aren't enough professional healthcare professionals. So technology can help solve that. And technology can help scale up the ability of a single doctor to, instead of managing maybe 300 or 400 patients, they can manage 3,000 or 4,000 because the data is clear, precise, right there in front of them. They're pulling blood pressure from some cool gadget in the home. They're pulling the weight from the scale or from the bed. The bed can measure weight, obviously. All these key data points. They can measure glucose readings in clever ways. All that can come in, and the doctor can then take action or get an alert that you need to do something, right? So I think that important piece of this delivery of healthcare cannot be ignored. It has to be considered. And the technology advances there are just as important, maybe even almost more important than the actual end user patient experience.
I completely agree. And I think to add to that, we're seeing there's an ever-growing emphasis on how this technology loops into the non-clinical support network of the service users, and how that, which is more of a, where the actual UI and the user experience is probably more important than the core technology in terms of how the family relate to the service user, is something that we're only starting to see really rise in terms of the priorities, but I think will be one of the biggest driving factors for what ultimately gets the biggest adoption for these new technologies.
I recently was exposed to a new technology that will track the gait of a person through their smartphone at a very accurate level. And one of the key indicators of urinary tract infections, UTI, is the gait changes. And so when that starts to happen, before the actual event becomes serious and the person needs to be hospitalized and the health challenges and the cost that goes with it, well, if you catch that 3 days in advance, which this app can do that, then guess what? You're avoiding those UTIs. It's a huge problem, right? So that's just one example that comes to mind.
So you mentioned that there's a change in terms of some of the service user adoption, and that people who are maybe over 75 right now are still learning how to adopt some of these new, maybe mobile phone-based technologies or Apple Watches. What do you believe, or what do you see as the biggest challenge facing our industry right now and maybe over the next year or so?
Wow, that's a big question and a good question. The biggest challenge facing, I'm going to call very broadly the aging technology services industry, is awareness. And it's almost sad that I have to say that, again. I probably said it 10 years ago, and I probably said it 20 years ago. Awareness of the solutions that are available. To me, that's the biggest challenge. At the clinician level, we'll start there. They don't even know all these things that are available. They can't keep track of all of them. It's hard to know what's available. So that's one issue. The healthcare systems are kind of getting into it a little bit, but innovation tends to cost their institutions, and it changes the workflow. So yeah, they want to raise their awareness, but also they're extremely reluctant to adopt new technologies. So that's kind of a combination of awareness and willingness to adopt new innovations. From the consumer level, they really don't know about the majority of the stuff that's out there. You and I are technology people, and we're aware of a lot of this really amazing stuff that's available. I mean, the vast majority of people have no idea this stuff is available. So to raise awareness, how do you do that? You can do mass advertising campaigns with the big boys, the Googles and the Metas and the Apples and all that, and spread the word. But that's a commercial. That's like or maybe that's an Instagram story or something for those who have Instagram, which guess what? The older folks don't have it necessarily, right? So how do you get that message out? And, what role does government play in raising awareness? There's a debate in the United States around the cost of all these remote monitoring tools and services as compared to the cost of care in the office in front of a doctor and the outcomes. So this is still going on, even though the data continues to show again and again that remote monitoring of, for safety reasons in the case of falls or the need to get help quickly, or in the case of predictive analytics and proactive care before things happen, like the example I gave on the UTI app, or in the case of standard ongoing vital sign monitoring, like what we do at Smart Meter, where we deliver data on a continuous basis, all that, yeah, there's a cost to it. But guess what? The studies show the cost of that is significantly less than the cost of emergency care, hospital admissions, hospital readmissions. All of that can be prevented or reduced through the technologies. But the folks who control the money, the government and the insurance companies, they're reluctant to make that change because it's new territory for them. So they will reduce their willingness to spread the word and raise awareness.
Yeah, it's such a truth. And then I hear that the B2C products are the only ones that are really refining how to market and therefore raise awareness to the end customers. But these B2C, rather than the ones going via insurance companies, so the private pay ones, have the least amount of money and the least amount of funding. So there's almost an incentive to go via the insurance companies and B2B. This is what I'm seeing. And so, yeah, there's this need for people who have a monetary incentive to raise awareness. I think that only comes from maybe being pushed higher up.
I agree completely.
So I know that you're actively seeing, exploring, playing around, testing, trying new innovations. What do you think will happen to those companies in this age tech space who are not actively adopting new innovations?
Well, very, very interesting question. I'll speak to the United States PERS industry specifically. They really haven't adopted at the pace they could, I would argue. And what will be the outcome of that? I think there will be continued consolidation. I think the strong will likely get stronger just based on, their reach and their ability to expand channels. But those channels that they're expanding into are going to migrate towards healthcare, and they're not really geared up to do that. Some of them have made acquisitions. So some of these new technology companies are getting acquired, to get back to the heart of your question. So I think there'll be some roll up, some acquisitions of the good technologies. Ultimately, it's a service industry, right? So it's how these technologies are applied from a service perspective. The advantage that the large telecare companies have is they have that connection into the home already, and they're trusted in the home. And so you can now layer in clinical monitoring tools and different technologies, passive monitoring tools, whatever it is, the sleep monitoring we mentioned a couple times. Maybe it's mobile applications for those customers who are willing to try it and use it or are capable. All that can be introduced by the telecare companies, and they can be very successful. So I would argue if they don't adopt it, somebody else is going to do it. And they already are. I mean, there are already companies that are doing this in a significant way. We have customers that are, into the hundreds of thousands of subscribers now. Like, that's serious reach in this industry. We'll be at 1 million in short order in the next couple of years. Companies that are staying ahead of it and building the tools will be very successful, I would argue.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. And one of my last questions, actually a couple more questions, is imagine one day you wake up and you look at the date and suddenly it's 2083 and you look down and your arms are wrinkly and you're suddenly an elderly man in 60 years from now. What would you like personally to use to stay independent, and what would you like your days as an elderly man to be like in terms of technology and in terms of supportive communication and supportive processes?
Really, really fun question. So I'm going to start with a little vignette because this just happened and it's related exactly to your question. So I recently had my 35th college reunion at Stanford University with my classmates, men I haven't seen in 35 years, literally. And one fellow who was in my freshman dorm as 18-year-olds, and we weren't great friends, but we certainly knew each other, and we were having this shared experience, going to this wonderful college. I saw him at the reunion, and we said, David Alexander. He said, Casey Pittock. My gosh, it's been 35 years. So we had a conversation, we caught up, and we kind of touched on what you just asked. And we said, what do you think? What does it look like for you for the next 50 years? We actually said 50 years, not 60. And he said, here's my goal. I've actually set a goal. And he's a very thoughtful guy. Again, I haven't seen him in 35 years. Think about this, like person to person, having a very open, honest, transparent conversation. It was very powerful. He looked me in the eye. He said, I want to be able to see with my own eyes, on my own 2 feet, walk out to my deck and look up and see Halley's Comet when it returns. And I said, Halley's Comet? When's that coming back? He said, 2061. I thought it was just an incredible story. And so you think about that. So I would answer it this way, okay? I would like to be able to do the same thing, Monty, to have my health to be in such a way that I can do those things myself. However, that's not likely going to be possible, right? So what would I like from technology? I would like to have very simple, easy-to-use tools that would enable me to get outside and see and hear commentary about it and read about it and process with my own brain, whether that's with a Neuralink thing that Musk is trying to build, whatever it is. I want to have the cognitive ability, the physical ability to step outside when I'll be 94 then at that point, actually, in 2061, to see Halley's Comet. That's how I would want technology to help me, to enable me to do that.
That is absolutely an epic answer. 94 is a good age to aim for. And yeah, it's nice to know. Hopefully we won't get hit by another comet before then. But yeah, that's a great thing to be working towards. In terms of, so you've had so much experience in this space, and I get the feeling that you'll continue to innovate in this space until Halley's Comet and beyond. What encouraging advice would you offer to listeners who are potential innovators, who are potential developers or entrepreneurs? What encouraging advice would you offer to listeners considering entering into the age tech space?
So I would say, number one, go experience it. Talk to people, interact with people who are aging, and get in their environment. I can tell you, in my first company so long ago, Telcare Systems, I was in over 1,000 seniors' homes. I tracked it. I looked at my travel log. I'd been in over 1,000 seniors' homes. I knew what the problems were. I understood the problems. So number one is get in their environment and understand what problems there are that you can solve. Number two, find out what you're passionate about. So yes, you've identified problems, but make sure you have a passion for whatever that problem is that you want to help with, whether it's from a personal experience, like my grandfather falling, or whatever it is. That passion can help you really focus in And more quickly, with passion, you will more quickly solve the problem. Guarantee it. And then number 3, I would say, do research. And you don't have to go to a public library with bricks and mortar anymore like I did. Do the research to understand what's out there and learn from what others have done, and learn from their mistakes in particular, but also learn from their successes. And I'll end with this on that question. It's always been about timing. The technology is there. And as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, your audience, everyone needs to think about, is the time right? I would say that's the last thing you need to put into the mix. The passion, the understanding of the market, the problem you're solving. Timing, is it the right time to do it? That's very, very important, because I've seen many companies be way too early. It's typically they're way too early. Check the timing.
I appreciate it, and I'm super motivated to go and maybe not go to a public library, because I don't think they exist so much in the UK anymore. I'm joking. But yeah, I really appreciate that. I think the listeners will find this really motivating, especially those who get stuck inside rather than actually going to talk to people. To add to what you said, in the first year of starting Yokeru, I went and lived in Northern Ireland, and I lived in 66 retirement living houses over a 3-month period. And I'd eat with all the elderly people, I'd play cards with them, and I would get to know them so well. And I'd say that, of all the experiences I've had, has been the most valuable part. And as soon as you've done that, then you can put everything in a slightly bigger context. So I can't imagine what it would have been like to go to 1,000. I thought 66 was a lot.
Great stuff. You did exactly the right thing. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah. Well, Casey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I've learned a lot from today. I look forward to chatting to you soon, and have a good day. Peace.
Thank you, Monty. Take care.